Hey guys, this is Cullen Moshman for CardsChat.com, and we are continuing on right now with me and Katie's course, Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days. And the topic of day 23 is a fun and exciting one, which is heads up and short-handed play. Now, the word short-handed is kind of a long word or compound word, which did not fit well on this slide, but rest assured we are going to talk about that, including in the early part of this video as well as the hand examples. And we call this the perfect excuse to play every hand, which is, of course, kind of a joke and an exaggeration. But the question is, how much looser should you play when you get to short-handed and heads-up play relative to full ring? And that is the topic of a lot of misconceptions and a big point of confusion about how you should play different between 9-man, 6-max, 3-handed, etc. So what I want to do is I want to pretend that we're playing 9-man, and then we move to 3-handed play. So everyone is going to say, oh, you've got to be so much looser in 3-handed. Is that correct? So what is true is that your VPIP should go way up. Your PFR stat should go way up. You're playing a much higher percentage of hands. So in that sense, yes, you should be playing much looser. But the question is, why are these stats going up? And the reason for that is because you're no longer playing the tightest positions, right? So if you're playing a full ring table, you're going to be tightest in early position. At least we hope you are at this point in the course. And so if you're folding UTG plus 1, MP, if you're not in those hands, then in the remaining positions you're going to be looser, which increase your stats, okay? So now we're going to be the button, the loosest position, not one time in 9, but one time in 3. And so that change is going to be what drives us to be looser. So it's going to be a natural adjustment in going from full ring to shorter handed play. And any leaks you have will get dramatically magnified. So if you play, for example, way too tight, you might be able to get away with that in a micro stakes 9-man table, but not at a 3-handed table when you're going to be the button that much more often. So what you want to do when deciding what hands to play is look at, for example, on the button, who are the blinds, what state of the tournament is it, and key factors like that, rather than has 2 people already folded or have 6 people already folded. That's not going to be the relevant factor. Okay, so with that said, let's look at heads up, which is where some of the biggest adjustments are going to come into play. First thing is that we're going to play all non-chunk hands on the button. And if you have, say, 10 blinds or less, maybe even up to 12 blinds if you want, then you can just be playing shove fold. And even as deep as 15 to 18 blind effective stack, some hands that are profitable to shove but don't play very well, such as low offsuit ace-x hands and low pocket pairs, best to just go ahead and shove those in. Deeper than that though, and you're going to be either min-raising or making a larger raise size, kind of like full ring. Okay, so for example, at full ring, at 50 blinds, you're normally going to be raising to 2.5 or 3 blinds, so 25 blinds min raising, so you keep that kind of a strategy. Post flop, you want to be extremely aggressive. Keep betting as a bluff. If you can value bet, definitely value bet. So apply a lot of pressure post flop, and we'll look at examples of that shortly. Now, while you want to generally be aggressive, there are a couple times where limping is good. And the main ones are if you're against weak opponents, then you can go ahead and incorporate some limping. So for example, you have a hand like 5-3 offsuit. You have a very loose passive player in the big blind. So you want to play the hand ideally, getting 3-1 or better odds and having position, but at the same time you don't want to build a pot when you also have very little fold equity on your pre-flop raise. So you can limp in and just look to play a small pot on the button. Or against an extremely aggressive opponent, he's always 3-betting your raises, then you can limp more on the button and you can play a balanced range. So in other words, you're not only limping weak hands because you want strong hands that you can defend against his raises and play some pot control. But for the most part, okay, you want to be raising your buttons. If you don't have a very compelling reason to limp, then raise the hands you want to play on the button, which is going to give you some pre-flop fold equity, some chance to win the pot immediately without a fight, which is super valuable, and also build up the pots you play in position. What about in the big blind? Well, you can jam wide over raises with a 20 blind or less effective stack, and also over limps. So ideally a little bit under 20 blinds effective, but most players who limp are going to be limp folding a lot, so you can definitely attack limps by jamming fairly wide. And when you do defend by calling, then be very stubborn calling down and give your opponent trouble. He's likely to be on a wide range, so don't be quick to fold, and we'll also look at examples of that. A couple of quick sample shoving ranges. So let's actually start at the bottom one first. The bottom one, big blind with 20 blinds. All of these hands we give, deuces, ace, deuce, king, 5, are going to be profitable shoves, at least using equilibrium ranges, which we'll talk about a little bit more later in the course. You can also defend some of the time by calling, and the ones you mainly want to call are going to be the ones with better playability. So a lot of the suited hands, and for example, 9-7 suited has great playability. We'll often call that a hand like low offsuit a6 hands and low pocket pairs. Just like they're good to shove on the button, they're very good 3-bit shove hands in the big blind. So those are very nice. And this button range of 10 blinds, this goes to what we talk about in the book, which is the free charts on Hold'em resources. Let me go ahead and pull that up so we can see what that looks like. So here's this first one, which is for the shover. You can select whether there's an ante or not. And if this looks complicated, you could use it really quick. Don't worry. All you do is you interpret it as the biggest effective stack where you can still shove the hand. So if we look here at, let's say, Queen 4 offsuit, the orange ones are offsuit, so Queen 4 is 7.9. And what that means is that if the effective stack in this heads-up match is anything 7.9 blinds or under, then you can shove the Queen 4 offsuit. If you have more than that, then it's too deep to shove, and assuming you're playing shove fold, your other option would be to go ahead and fold. And there's a similar one for calling ranges just below, so this is going to be a nice resource that we link to in the book. So we've looked at these ranges, and now I want to go ahead and move to the hands where we're going to check out a variety of both short-handed and heads-up hands showing these concepts in action. So let's go ahead and take a look now. So these are going to be hands that I have played on WPN recently, and what we're doing here is we have up, as per day 21, we have up the simple HUD that we've talked about before, so we can talk about the stats that are relevant to some of these decisions. Okay, so here, for example, we have this guy's player name, the number of hands we have up against him, and then we also have his VPIP, his PFR, and his 3-bet pre-flop percent. So let's see how this one plays. 10-5 suited, we're normally going to call any small raise. So if the button had min raised, I will call. If the small blind min raises, I'll call. Instead, the small blind limps. Now, checking is fine here. This hand definitely has some post-flop playability. But some of the time, what are they doing is jamming. And that's what I do here. Usually, if somebody is strong, they're going to go ahead, particularly an aggressive player like this. If he is strong, he's usually going to raise. So I'm going to play sort of a mix here. I think, again, checking is fine. When we do that, we can connect, or if we see weakness, we can attack weakness. But a lot of the time, we can just go ahead and jam here. And the benefits of jamming, why this is a nice play, is because a ton of the time, we're going to win almost 14,000 chips without a fight, which is a great outcome. It's around a quarter of our stack. And when he does call, we're usually going to be somewhat live with our suited 10x hand. So next, ace 5 offsuit. And here we have up, this is going to be heads up in a 9-man sit and go. And the player in the small blind goes ahead and limps. And here with the ace 5, it doesn't really matter what he does. And what I mean by that is we can go to the charts we already looked at on Hold'em resources and see that you can definitely call with any ace for well over 10 blinds. So if he shoved, we will call. If he folds, that's great. If you can call an all in, then you can certainly 3-bet shove over a small raise. So if he raised small, I would jam. And when he limps, I'm also going to jam. So unlike the last spot where both options are on the table, this is one where you absolutely want to shove. This hand does not play all the way up post flop. You have the ace blocker. There's no reason to be suspicious of this player's limp, given that he has a fairly wide gap between his VPIP and his PFR. So a pretty clear shove to take this pot down. So now here's a hand against the same opponent, and he min raises. And I clicked too fast. So when he min raises, this hand is sort of on the cusp. There's no problem at all folding 8-5 offsuit here. So the options are going to be to fold or call. I actually fold this hand most of the time, but for whatever reason in game I call. Now definitely 8-7 offsuit is strong enough that you have to defend in the big blind. 8-6 offsuit I would normally also defend. 8-4 offsuit I would definitely fold. And usually 8-5 offsuit is the best hand that I fold. So kind of a long-winded explanation, but I think that these calling and defending ranges are important, so that's what I would play. And the first thing we want to assess at this flop is how good a flop is this? How far should we be willing to take it? And my answer here is that if you're playing, let's say, full ring and under the gun raises and you have some kind of very weak second pair hand like this, that's not something you're going to take very far. You might just chuck fold to a single bet. Whereas here, this is actually a pretty strong hand heads up. Okay, so heads up ranges are very wide, and most of the time this guy will not have an ace. He's just a single player who all he's done is raised once. So most of the time he's not going to have an ace or a flush or anything like that. It's much easier to just have some kind of random hand besides one of the relatively few hands that have a speed. So because also the stack to pot ratio, or another way of saying that, is the pot is large relative to the effective stack. The pot's 1200, the effective stack is under 3 times that. So my plan here is I am willing to play for stacks. I check, and my plan is that if he bets, I'm going to move all in. It's just too difficult for him to have a better hand here. And what does he actually have? So we could call, which is probably not good news. But in fact, he also has 8-5. He was free rolling us with the 5 of diamonds. But again, the main concept from this hand is that when you defend the big blind, you have to be much more stubborn post-flop in a heads-up scenario. So we're continuing in the same match, and this is another one where this is a very strong hand. Second pair with a good kicker is a monster heads up. So we're going to be really happy to get stacks in here. We bet if our opponent raises, we're going to move all in. If he shoves, we're going to be very happy to call. So again, stack off wider in these spots. We don't get action, but we would have been very happy to play a large pot heads up. Now this one illustrates a different concept, which is what should we do here with the king 9? We want to be aggressive, as we know from the earlier section on c-betting, we're going to c-bet a lot, but this also triggers one of the possible c-betting exceptions, which is that we have reasonable showdown value here. We have king high, as well as backdoor straight and flush draws, and this is often going to be the best hand. If our opponent does have an ace, he's usually going to re-raise pre-flop, and if he doesn't, okay, so let's say, for example, here that he has an ace or a better hand, it's very unlikely he's going to fold to our c-bet. Very few better hands are going to fold if we c-bet. At the same time, not many worse hands are going to call. If this guy has some kind of hand like, Jack 6, he's usually just going to fold unless it happens to be Jack 6 suited in hearts. So for that reason, I don't think it would be crazy by any means to c-bet here, but we check back for pot control. We're just looking to play a small pot here with our king 9. So if he checked, I would check again and look to showdown cheaply. When he bets, it's going to come down to what we know about him and his sizing. So he bets about 3/4 of pot. We haven't connected. He has fairly passive stats with that kind of wide VPIP and PFR gap. So for that reason, we just give it up at the turn. And one last against the same opponent. So here we have a very strong draw. Okay, we have a gut shot and a flush draw. So this is a 12-out draw. We're going to win here approximately 48% of the time, improved by the river. And not only do we have the gut shot and the flush draw, but heads up, hitting our king is usually going to give us the best hand as well. So we like this hand a lot. Again, we would be happy to play a large pot. But here we check back the turn because we pick up good showdown value. If we bet, it's going to be difficult to get him to fold a better hand than our 5. So we check back and we take the free card. Here at the river, he bets, and we use our hand as a bluff catcher. We haven't hit our draw, but we do beat a bluff, holding third pair. We are getting odds of about 3-1, so all we need is to be good here about a quarter of the time. And heads up, you need to assume if you comfortably beat a bluff and you're getting good odds, then you should go ahead and make that call, unless you have a very strong read. So we call, and we're good against this bottom pair. So now let's look at a hand against a different opponent. And here, this is going to be from the end of an on-demand sit and go. So here I take a slightly more unconventional play, which is that I limp. And the reason why I limp, I would normally min raise here, is because this player is a regular in my games. I have been limping some weaker hands, so I also limp here with a strong hand that has good playability. Again though, this would normally be a raise. So we stab the flop, he calls, and this is not a good hand to continue betting because it has good showdown value. I check back not because I'm giving up, but because I want to take my ace-10 to showdown. If he bet the river, we would have to call, but instead he checks, and I check back. Again, not giving up, but because of the showdown value of the ace-10 high, and he plays his bottom pair well. In fact, he might even value bet this river. Another one with 4-6, we limp here against a player who has kind of passive stats over a small sample. He could be a good reg, but 1913, kind of a wide gap between the VPIP and PFR. So we see if we can get away with limping some junky hands against him. When we do that and we completely miss the flop, we've got no showdown value, we definitely want to bet. So if we had limped a hand like ace-5 here, we might check that back. But we're going to be betting with any of our junky hands as well as any of our strong hands, like if we hit a jack or a 7. Let's look at another one here with ace-6 offsuit. I go ahead and shove. This is just like we talked about. These hands don't play all that well. We're going to shove them up to deeper effective stacks, and that's what I do here. And then when against the same opponent, so at 12 blinds, we can certainly min raise. I don't know all that much about him. He seems reasonably aggressive. We're going to see what we can get away with. And Jack 5 offsuit is good enough to play on the button. So we put out the c-bet, and he check shoves. So I'm just going to fold here. Obviously, I'm not going to call it off. And the reason why I include this hand is to say, don't worry if you're following the system, and some of the time it's just not going to work out. Okay, it's totally reasonable to raise Jack 5 off on the button, heads up, to c-bet when you miss the flop, and he's going to win this pot. And that's just how it's going to happen a lot of the time when fortunes change quickly in a heads-up match. So any ace 20 blinds or less, when you're in the big blind, your opponent raises, you can go ahead and 3-bet shove, which is what I do here. And Queen Jack offsuit. So here we could call a raise of, a shove of 13 blinds effective with Queen Jack. So again, if we can call a shove, that means that facing a smaller raise, we can re-raise all in. And that's what I do here. The pot is large, so I go ahead and shove. This time we get called. It looks like a pretty good flop for us. So we get it in bad and bank the suck out, which is always nice. Heads up. Or I guess at any point in the game. And that's going to bring us to the last hand and today's quiz question, which interestingly will not be pre-flop. So let's take a look at how this hand progresses. And I'm going to ask you guys a late street question. So 20 blinds effective, I go ahead and limp. And the reason why I'm limping here is because I have super aggressive stats on my opponent. He's playing 46-31. He's been 3-betting a lot. He's been attacking a lot. So if I raise this hand, I don't want to have to call an all-in or fold versus an all-in. So instead, I limp because it's unlikely that he shoves in 21 blinds. And if he raises small, then I can call and take a flop or even 3-bet shove. Instead, he checks, and both options at the flop are completely reasonable. This is a dry flop. If we had missed it, let's say we have a hand here like 7-4 of spades, okay? Then we're definitely going to bat with 7 high. And similarly, if we're pretty strong, we can bat. But this hand, we're not going to get better hands to fold. We're not going to get worse hands to call. So some of the time here, I'm just going to check this back, take the showdown value, which is what I do in this instance. At the turn, he bets, and besides still having showdown value, we also have the nut flush draw, so we're definitely going to call. He checks river, so my question to you guys is check or bet? And the correct answer here, full credit, is for betting. The reason why you want to bet is for value. You want to be the value bet a lot heads up, and it's very difficult for him to have a better hand. It's very unlikely as an ace because he did not raise pre-flop. This is a limped pot. Also, if he did have an ace, then he's probably going to bet the river as well. He's probably going to value bet it. So it's very unlikely that he has an ace. And occasionally, he might have some kind of slow play like queen jack, or he might have a better king. But the vast majority of the time, our hand will be best, and we should value bet it and hope that he calls us with a worse hand, such as a 10 or a 6. So I go ahead and bet about 400, 900. He folds, but this is definitely a spot where we need to be value betting. And that concludes today on Heads Up. Tomorrow we have a very fun one on mental game, avoiding tilt. So stay tuned for that one. And thanks very much for watching. This has been Colin Moshman on behalf of myself, Katie Dozier, and the cardschat.com course, Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days.